I think we're going to get started because it looks like we've got a decent volume of people here. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for taking out the time and for joining this super interesting conversation. So today I've got an amazing panel. We're going to have a pretty meaty chat. It should be quite a few controversial moments, as there should be in any good discussion that helps to drive progress. We're going to be talking about the inclusion illusion today. So, as you will have seen from the synopsis, we're going to be talking about all sorts of things around data quality, AI, and really what inclusion truly means in our sector. So I'm going to start off just by getting a little intro. Most of you know most of these wonderful folks on the panel, all of these wonderful folks on the panel, but I'm going to start by getting them to give you a little intro. After I give you a little intro to me, because I forgot to do that. I'm Shazia Ginai, for those of you who don't know me. I have been a member of the Colour of Research gang for a chunk of time now, a few years, on and off for a bit. And we're here to talk about all things related to inclusion. We look at it specifically through the lens of race, but we also look at other intersections. So I'm going to hand over to Rebecca to give us a little intro now.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Rebecca Cole. I am CEO at Cobalt Sky. We are an online data collection and data processing organization. I chaired the MRS Representation and Research Steering Group for 4 years, and I'm also heavily involved with the Global Data Quality Initiative, of which MRS is a key stakeholder. And I'm also chair designate for the MRS, and I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you for joining us. Maya.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Maya Ilic. I work at Ipsos as I'm a global lead for innovation of online communities. So that's just one of the many things that we are doing at Ipsos, but this is a business unit specifically focused on online communities. I've been working with this, with online communities for several years now, but I come originally for Qual. And I say that because probably going to hear a lot of anecdotes about qualitative research during this chat. I'm based in Spain, in Madrid, and yeah, I'm also super happy to be here with you today.
Great, Sabrina.
Hi everyone, I'm Sabrina Trinketel. I'm a researcher turned sales lead, currently in the commercial team at YouGov, who, in case you don't know, are specialists in public opinion polling and brand tracking and audience profiling. Outside of my day job, I co-chair the MRS Pride group, and we are, just a quick shout out, because we're marching at London Pride next Saturday. So also, if anyone wants to join us, I think there's a few spaces left. I also sit on the MRS EDI Council and the AIA Council, which is the Advanced Insights and Analytics Council. And that's kind of where I'm bringing both those passions together today to talk about AI through an inclusive lens, basically. And when I'm not doing any of that, I'm trying to referee my 2 boys who are 2 and 4. So yeah, that keeps me busy.
Awesome. And last but not least, Tatenda. Where are you at, T? There you are.
Hey. Camera working? Okay.
Yeah, you're all
Okay,
good.
cool. Hey everyone, I am Tatenda. I am the product and data lead at a company called Prograd, and essentially what we do is we offer money and financial incentives for young people to do side hustles and activities. Before that, I was at Savanta. And as well as that, I'm one of the co-founders of Colour of Research. So very much interested in everything around DEI and specifically that from an ethnic perspective. And yeah, really excited to be on the talk today because AI is definitely a buzzword right now. So yeah, it'll be really exciting to see what we can talk and delve into.
Amazing, thank you. So we do have a Q&A button there, I believe, and the chat box, which people are chatting in. If anyone does have any questions, please do pop them in there. And if we have time at the end, we'll try and get to as many questions as possible. But we're going to start with something a little broader, just to sort of set the scene here. Let's talk a bit about the current landscape. So we're seeing the rise of AI, which is brilliant news, but we're also seeing the decline in DEI initiatives due to the current political landscape. I'm going to try and keep my language clean when I talk about that. So I'd love to hear from you guys on broadly how you think that's impacting the market research sector.
I'll go up. I'll start.
Go
Yeah,
for it.
as you say, Shasha, there's a lot of talk, I guess, of the last year or so. I've noticed it more so probably in North America than probably outside of the pond around sort of a backlash against DI programs. I remember last year when the whole the election with Trump was happening, a lot of people were talking about go woke, go broke, which was a big term being used around and bandied around. And I think the problem is a lot of organizations seem to look at DEI programs as something that's going to take a lot of resource and be a distraction from the bottom line and making money, as it were. And I think this is probably something that we've seen a little bit of that in our industry. And I know it's been a tough year for some agencies as well. But essentially, the way I look at it is this, it's one of those things that if you do it properly, yeah, fair enough, it may be intensive up front. It's obviously going to be like that. But once it becomes part nature of what you do as a business and the culture's there, it almost is just by and by, right? If that makes sense. So, we all work in market research and we have a lot of Q&A standards within our sector. And it's very rare that people start complaining about those because it's just part of what we do in the nature of making sure that we have accurate data and so forth. And so I kind of look at DI in the same way. And as time goes on, most of the time people find sort of shortcuts and hacks to try and save time around these things once it becomes a standard business practice. So to kind of go around to your question, I think it's almost a negative or bad idea to think about it that way, because I think in the long term, there's going to be added value anyway.
Thanks, T. How about others? What were your thoughts on it? Both AI and sort of the DEI stuff going on right now.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with you, T, in terms of everything that you've said. And one of the things that came out of the most recent EDI survey of the MRS, some of the results were shared at the Equality Summit earlier this year, but I think they're available on the website, was that some of those individual measures have become worse since the last time that we surveyed everybody. So that impact of stepping away from EDI and not having it as a priority is being seen, I guess, through the real experiences of people. So, for example, in all of these measures, it was worse than it was in 2022. So I feel like I belong to my company. I am emotionally and socially supported. I get recognition of the work done well. Senior managers are fair. Diversity and inclusion is taken seriously at all levels of the organization. So every single one of those metrics, there's more as well, are kind of reducing, I guess, in positivity. And more worryingly than that, there's also been an increase in reported discrimination in certain factors, again, being unfairly spoken over, undervalued, colleagues taking sole credit, demeaning language, things like this. So, I mean, of course, there's a slight argument that maybe there's more people reporting these things than before. But equally, we shouldn't see these numbers continue to rise. So there's clearly an impact of, I guess, the stepping back of EDI. And I think when we talk about EDI with AI, it's kind of really difficult to separate the two. And I think under the umbrella of AI, we should always be having that conversation of EDI and inclusivity and ethical AI. And actually, I think that there's an opportunity to use AI to turbocharge the narrative around EDI. So, I mean, we can go forward and talk about that in more detail in a minute, but I think there's a 100% need to have EDI in the conversation when we're talking about AI across all the elements. So from the initial description of what you're trying to build, how you make decisions about the models, how you integrate the data and what data sources and what kinds of data you're using, what questions you're asking, and also how you're analyzing. So there's the whole ecosystem, I guess, of it. And it is an opportunity to bring EDI actually back onto the table. And that's what I think is actually quite interesting about how we take this forward.
Yeah. Bex, from the point of view of, being really entrenched in stuff like representation and research and seeing sort of the sample side of this and representation, I'd love to hear from you on that kind of interface of AI and DEI or EDI, whichever version we want to.
Yeah, whichever order we're putting them in. So yeah, I mean, to echo Sabrina, I think probably everyone on the panel, recognizes that there's an awful lot of opportunities up for grabs when it comes to embracing AI and the efficiencies that AI can offer. But I think first and foremost, we have to accept that, efficiency without equity is not progress, and we need to be mindful of that. And then in terms of the kind of decline of, DEI commitments, I mean, the Representation and Research Group has spent a lot of time over the years trying to improve the representation of research projects and making sure that, underrepresented groups aren't being excluded, etc. And that's all great, but we have to make sure we're building on that, because I think one of the pushbacks on EDI from both sides of the fence is a fear that some of these initiatives become a box ticking exercise. So we've got to be mindful of that. So when it comes to things like research samples, for example, I think we can get a bit too boxy about it, because we shouldn't be asking ourselves, did we include group X in our sample? Tick that box. It should be much more about, did we empower group X to shape the conversation and the insight? And I think that what that means for our sector is we've got to move beyond just thinking about sample composition, and we really need to start thinking about the format in which we're talking to people, especially in the attention economy that we have at the moment, which I think we might touch on a little bit as we go through. But yeah, we've got to evolve the way we're talking to people, I think.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And Maya, I mean, you've got a quite a unique lens, obviously being heavily engaged in synthetic data, but also being at Ipsos, which is one of the key players in our sector, right? So I'd love your thoughts on this too.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just love the idea of the phrase ethical AI that Sabrina mentioned before. And but ethics aside, I think this also is a lot to do with actual accuracy of what we're producing out there. And both, I mean, all my fellow panelists have already been, talking about this. But essentially, I mean, it's great that we have AI. It's bringing so many efficiencies. It's helping us along in all the different tasks that we can think about. And obviously, there's so much hype because of that. But we are kind of moving away from that idea, very core idea of what we are supposed to produce as researchers, which is accurate data, accurate representation of the world, right? And I don't think at this moment, if we look at what generative AI, which is really what's producing this huge revolution in our sector and everywhere else, what we're getting back is really not that accurate. And that it's easier with numbers, but it becomes very clear with qualitative data. So if you're trying to reproduce open-ended answers or discussions or any kind of qualitative data with synthetic, you will run across this. Just this general, very bland, very normative talk that you get back from generative AI, which is, it's a probabilistic model. It just comes back with the most common word that comes in a string of words. So how representative is that really? How representative is it even of the mainstream? If we assume that there's some kind of a mainstream, but it's really not giving us back what should be very accurate, right? It's not an accurate representation of the world, of the consumers, of the customers, of all these different audiences. But it kind of takes me back also to a more fundamental question, which is, how do we actually define diversity, and how do we define mainstream, etc. In a world where, 1 in 6 people has significant disability. That's over 1 billion of people worldwide. In a world where, in countries like US and UK, the fastest growing ethnic groups are so-called mixed race ethnic groups, which in itself are hugely diverse. So what does that really say about who we are today, right? So who are we studying? So going back again to accuracy, if we have so many different variables, race, ethnicity, life stage and generations, gender, sexuality, nationality, ability, etc., we can't really safely say that there is such a thing as normal anymore. So DEI has to be at the core of everything that we do, because it's just more accurate.
Yeah, gosh, that's such a statement, right? It's what we need to be talking about more and more and more. Thank you for sharing that. So, I mean, the accuracy piece feeds really nicely into the conversation around data quality, which is not a new conversation. Clearly, it's something that the industry has been talking about for a number of years. Like, it's almost a little bit boring how long we've been talking about it. It's not a new chat, but we did see it come back into the frame recently. And I'm just going to read out here the press release that said, but it was back in April, an indictment has been unsealed charging 8 defendants in connection with an international scheme to bill $10 million in fraudulent market survey data. So I think, I mean, that news when it came out was a shocker. They listed the 8 people who, could be charged and sent to jail for a chunk of time for what they've done. And it brought back around the conversation around data quality. So I'm curious just to hone in on that a little bit. We've been talking about this forever. What is it that the market research sector is getting wrong here? How have we not solved this problem?
So I think, I think you're absolutely right. Data quality as an issue is not new for our sector. I do think in our defense, I do think that the levels of which we were seeing fraud, for example, have grown exponentially in recent years, with the rise of technology and bot click farms and bot responses and things like that. So, we always had a problem.
Yeah.
Was it maybe more of an acceptable level if you're removing 5% of your data set, okay, that's kind of okay. Or if 5% gets through and it's poor quality, and it's gone much higher now. And I think that's why it has come back into the forefront of everyone's conversations. And that's a good thing, because it needed to. And what that's meant is, I think that there's a lot more awareness now. Clients are a lot more aware of it than they maybe were previously. So people are aware of the need to clean their data, to have measures in place to kind of monitor fraudulent activities and things like that, which is all good and it's all necessary. However, what that does mean is we are now removing an awful lot of data from our research projects. And I think the issue that I have with that is, and I'm a quantie, so apologies for being kind of quant focused, but certainly on the quant side, an awful lot of our research projects are still very traditional 15, 20-minute online surveys. And again, going back to the attention economy, I'm just not sure that that's the way people engage with anything anymore. I was listening to a podcast this morning that was talking about micro dramas, that apparently this kind of growing thing where even drama content is now being broken down into 5-minute chunks and you watch like 50 of them. But traditional surveys, I think, from that perspective in the attention economy, I think that it means that we are disproportionately excluding certain groups from that traditional format. It's people with less time, with less cognitive bandwidth, with different access needs. They're being excluded from the research, I think, disproportionately. So if you think about what that means that we're losing out on, it's neurodivergent individuals, it's caregivers, shift workers, the young generation, people with disabilities, all these things. And the thing with this highlight on data quality is that even if we can get those people into these research projects, and by the end of this 20-minute online survey, they run out of an attention and they type something nonsensical in an open-ended response, we're then removing them from the data completely. So even if we can get them in, we're then taking them back out again, and that is disproportionate, I think. And I think, again, it goes back to, we need to understand that inclusion in research and data quality in research is more about how we talk to people. And I don't think we have evolved at all in the main in terms of the format that our projects are taking. And we've got to evolve to be more experience-led, 100%. And that's not just from a DEI perspective, it's from an entire sector. In the current attention economy, I just don't think that that's going to continue to cut it with people. And I think data quality we're probably removing at a disproportionate way because we're not understanding how the attention economy has changed.
Oh yeah, and it has really done a number on a lot of things. But yeah, T, you've unmuted yourself.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I kind of have had a very much front-facing experience of this. My previous experience at Youth Site, you can all imagine we used to have a panel of young people. And I remember when I first started working there, I was a project manager, and we used to get into these fights with some of our clients who were doing sample-only surveys with us, who were hosting a survey that had 20 million grids, wasn't mobile ready. And it was very, because I'd come from a marketing background before working in market research, and I was just very complex at how the industry was almost so far behind where sort of the rest of the marketing world is from a user experience perspective. And we had to do a lot to try and negotiate with clients. Can you make this change? Can you make that change? But the problem we always had was, you work on a tracker, which might be 20, 30 years old. You then get into these weird debates around data quality and validation and so forth. And I think the wider point is around this attention span point. And I think the wider point is around to what extent, as an industry, are we really bringing ideas from the rest of the world around making user experience front and forefront of what we're trying to do? Because ultimately, as we keep on saying, we're interviewing people here, not respondents, not data. It's actually real people. And what would people do to spend their time? There's so many different ways you can spend time online, for instance, YouTube, et cetera, et cetera. And I just think we're not doing enough to, bring in new ideas and bring in people from outside the market research sector to say, this is what we do, and I'll give you an example right now. I'm a pro grad and they're not a market research company. And it has its challenges sometimes, I'll be very honest, but it's just so refreshing to work at a company where user experience is at the forefront of what they do, because they are trying to get young people to engage with their platform. That's like all they do. And it's just been very eye-opening to understand how you actually change the way that, you get people to engage with surveys. For instance, we do streaks and gamification just on the incentive process. It's totally different to the traditional here's 50p for a 10-minute survey. So I just think the wider point I'm trying to say is I think there's much more we need to do as an industry to bring in this idea around experience into the research process, into the fieldwork process, basically.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add in there, I think that AI, although it's kind of causing some of the problems, can also be the solution, because it will allow us to be more flexible with those types of inputs and those types, and do that on scale, right? And just coming back to, I guess, what Maya was saying earlier about kind of accuracy and what the kind of main kind of LLM models are made from is just kind of very standardized information from the internet, that's kind of pulled in one or two types of formats that, as you said, kind of excludes pretty much any kind of nuance that there is in the world, and flattens it and kind of removes kind of cultural understanding or any types of kind of gender discrimination and things like that. It's going to, I think you were saying before, Bex, kind of like emphasize and re-emphasize and on an exponential level those biases. And so it's kind of like it's kind of strange, because I guess we're kind of coming to a point where we're having all these challenges, but actually it's also the solution, because we can use these tools to then bring in different types of information that relevant and are kind of conducive to bringing in minority views in different ways through video or like, visual, voice notes or whatever it is, whatever kind of content or creative content that we want to bring in, and use these models to actually analyze them on scale, which is something that we would never be able to do before. And I think just coming, because my kind of viewpoint is always coming back at this from an EDR and inclusive perspective, it really comes back to what do we, as individuals, as organizations, and as an industry, what do we value, and what do we consider to be important in our data and in the things that we're collecting. And that will always direct then how you build and how you process and how you collect that data. If you think it's important, if you place value in those people and those voices, then it will all kind of stream through into how you're kind of going through that process. So I think that's really important to consider. And one of the things that I think is probably a bit of a takeaway, I guess, for the people listening and us going forward is actually that's all of our business, that's all of our responsibility, and we should all be thinking about that. And this is actually, again, like I didn't think I would be so positive about AI, to be honest, because like if you talked to me like 6 months ago, I was like, this is like the death of everything. But actually, it does represent opportunity in how we can rethink some of these processes and some of those power shifts.
Yeah, I always think of it like anything. You can use a tool for good or for evil, right? And there's
Yeah.
so much power and positivity that can come from using it in the right way to drive these sorts of things forward.
Yeah, but framing is everything, right? Like
Right.
how do we actually approach this problem? Because if you look at it, I mean, what Rebecca was saying before, so much data cleaning, we're excluding so much out of that. That's just leading to potentially silencing a lot of the voices, as she was explaining, right? But that happens in absolutely everything that we do. It's not just quant surveys. In qual, we do it, and we do it out of our own natural bias, and not maybe any kind of a DEI linked bias, but just by having a participant in a focus group who doesn't talk very much. Well, then you go back to the recruiter with your notes afterwards, and you say, hey, this person, maybe not invite them next time. But it's not the recruiter's fault. It's not the person's fault. Maybe it's your fault as a moderator that you haven't really cracked the way to engage with them. Or maybe the focus group is not the right medium, right? So, I mean, there's so much to think about. And it really starts with us being reflective about how we do things. And to Sabrina's point as well, I mean, I find huge potential in AI. It's made my life a lot easier in so many different ways. And it's opened up so many different ways that we can innovate and do things differently. But how we actually frame everything from the onset is going to really mark how this is being implemented and what kind of results it brings us back. I mean, just thinking about gamification and those long surveys where people give up, AI can potentially really take care of that with conversational quant, right? But conversational quant, if it's just giving you back questions as if you're in I don't know, a job interview, and it just sounds like everything with a super formal tone, is not going to be useful to you. You're not going to engage your respondents, right? So training is going to be extremely crucial in this entire process. But also we need to be very, very reflective. Like, what are we trying to achieve, and how do we want to engage with people and not exclude all that range of different audiences that we have to talk to, that we should be talking to.
Yeah. So many interesting points raised, so much stuff to talk about. I mean, Bex, your point around the attention economy is very real. Back when I was running NeuroInsight, one of the things that we saw multiple times in all of our studies is the beautiful brain, magical brain. It takes the easiest route. So what we're seeing is it's looking for the stuff that's going to have the like the activities with the lowest cognitive load are the
Yeah.
ones that it's going to go for. And as a result, you know, these 5-minute drama things, which by the way, I heard you say it and I was like, cool, I think I might check that out.
100%.
But there's also, TikTok, the change in the way that media has evolved has obviously impacted the behavior massively and in a way perhaps that we aren't following. And I think also, a few of you, Sabrina, the advocate for AI, I'm with you on that. I think we all are. I think we're all really big fans of technology. Arguably, the market research sector has been a bit behind on this front. I think if we weren't, and T, you mentioned, taking in examples from other places, from other sectors, where they're perhaps a bit more innovative than we are. We're sort of following rather than leading, even though we are the gatekeepers of human truth in a lot of ways. I think there's perhaps a little bit of fear. We know historically AI has been seen to have some bias of its own. There was that really famous example where Amazon years ago had developed an AI tool for recruitment purposes, and it was basically filtering all the CVs to then only have like white males basically coming through the filter. And again, it goes back to how the programming is done. So I think, we probably believe, I think we do believe that the rise of AI is going to really benefit our sector for sure. But how is it that we can encounter some of those issues around that inherent bias in those models?
How long have you got?
Yeah, I know, right? This is a long one. But yeah, hit
I
me.
guess there's,
What do you think?
for me, there's two aspects to this. One is the basic models. I say basic, that's not the right word, but the base models that most of us are using. So like a, you know, OpenAI or a, you know, as a starting point. And those have an inherent huge amount of bias baked into them. And there is an argument that we are not leading, you know, in those companies, but that doesn't mean that we should be completely ignoring it and be completely complicit, I guess. We should also, whilst at that very starting point, ask the questions about what we can understand and do and learn and mitigate from what those kind of models already have baked into them, I guess. And then and then for me, it kind of comes to the question of well, there's also the question of, do you actually need AI? Do you really need to build a model? Do you really need to do these things? And then there's two streams of kind of, how do we make it as simple and as transparent as possible? And questions around, I mean, you talk about accuracy, but also about, um, the words escaped me, but about kind of efficacy and kind of fairness. That's it. So actually, you know, are we choosing more accurate models over over being a bit more fair in whose voice we actually hear? So there's a lot of questions up front, I think, that need to be asked, thought about, and considered.
Yeah.
And I think people can arm themselves with, you know, a lot of that knowledge up front. We've got a lot of content from the MRS already around AI guidance. There's a couple of papers, there's some, you know, webinars, there's podcasts, just about understanding the types of questions to ask. And then also, you know, thinking about, I guess, the data that we're using to kind of train the model, and also the prompts and all that stuff. And I think it comes back to diversity and having the right people in the room to ask those questions and to be those provocateur kind of people, to make sure that these are not just kind of passed by and looked at post build, but actually built in through the process of the development.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think absolutely. And I think you know, there's a real opportunity here for us, not just on the how can we utilize AI, but actually, as I think someone's just asked a question about this, but how can we position ourselves as being essential to the ongoing rise of AI? Because, you know, if AI does continue to rise in the way that we think it will, what will become the real collateral to anyone, everyone, is a constant, steady flow of really clean, inclusive primary data. Because without that constant flow of new data, it's got to be new, then, you know, the AI will just eat itself, you know. So maybe, you know, we try, you know, to talk about kind of what's the ROI on inclusive research and things like that. Well, there is going to be a huge demand for this clean, inclusive data sets to go in, because we talk a lot about training models. But that can sometimes make it feel as if you train it once and then it's done. It's not. You know, it needs constant primary data, and that primary data has to be of the very highest possible quality. And I also do think there's an opportunity here for us. You know, bias in automation is not new. You know, any algorithm that's ever been written had the potential to have bias written into it. That's decades, you know.
Yeah.
And our sector is uniquely placed, I think, to know how to counter bias, to know how to put guardrails in place. And so I think that there's an opportunity there that we really need to lean into. But I think as well, and this is just a more generic point about our sector, a sector which I dearly love, by the way, but good God, we are slow. We are so slow. I mean, AI snuck up on us, and that's beyond disappointing, really. And, and the stuff that T was talking about, learning new ways of engaging with it. I mean, God, are we behind the curve on that? So we've just got to find a way, I think, of evolving quicker. And we know, again, from all the EDI work, we are slow movers as a sector. And I don't know necessarily what the reasons for that are, or what the answers to that are, but we can't keep being that slow to just evolve from, I don't know, just introducing mobile. I mean, we're still not always doing that, by the way. We just won't survive if we can't evolve a bit faster, whilst also making sure we're doing that in a mindful way. But we've got to focus on what we should be doing, and compare that to what we are doing, and they're worlds apart, I think.
Yeah, gosh, so true. It's a scary time if we're not moving at pace, for sure. I want to move on because I think we've only got 20 minutes left. But I mean, we've talked about the fact that we're kind of we've made some moves in pushing some innovation along, but we are playing catch up, right? And we've done some work on driving DEI forward, but we're also a really long way off on that. We often have there's often a conversation which says, oh, we're ahead of maybe the advertising world when it comes to DEI. I mean, that baseline is low because they have a whole other set of problems, as many of you will have seen from some of the work that's been going on with the Cannes Lions event this past week. But I think one of the more controversial and very real truths in this is our leadership profile of the sector. We have a lot of women in this sector. We have not enough people of color. There's not enough diversity, but we have some. But the leadership profile remains as it always has been. It's still very predominantly white and male, able-bodied, straight, that kind of a profile. So let's talk about what you'd share as actions for those leaders, because if we're trying to push inclusive AI, and as many of you have said, we need a table of humans leading that are also representative of that diverse and inclusive world, but they're not. What's the message we should give to those leaders to try and take some action to move forward on this, other than give some of your seats to some other people?
I just have a wider point outside of specific organizations. I think, Bex, you made a really good point about we know very well how to reduce bias as an industry. And I think from a leadership standpoint, in terms of the industry as a whole, and I don't know if this is MRS to do this, ESMR to do this, I think we have a real opportunity to go away and start really maybe potentially approaching companies like OpenAI, Grok, et cetera, about saying this is the best way to reduce bias in the way that you put your models together. And I don't think we are doing that, but the fear is if that isn't happening and no one is actually doing that, the fear is you have a confirmation bias with AI and people just start believing what's coming through and what's being turned out, even if it might not be right. And the long tail of that can be quite negative and quite bad down the line, socially, culturally, et cetera. So I think just talking about leadership here, I think one takeaway could be, I think there's more that we should and can be doing as an industry to start approaching these companies that put these models together. Because let's be honest, there is also this potential fear that people, i.e. not us, but maybe clients or SMEs and small other organizations could start using AI models as a way to do market research and predict to save money potentially. And if we're not in those conversations, if we're not driving that potentially, there could be some real negative consequences, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Very true.
Did you want to go next? Oh gosh, everyone's got a view on this.
I love it when everyone has a view.
Yeah, I just very quickly, I think, it's another element that we haven't really discussed, but T's just touched upon, is there is an illusion with these AI offerings that they are neutral and they are trustworthy and that they are right, and a lot of the time they're kind of marketed in that way, as this neutral voice. And I just think, we've got to remember that they do not have any ethics. They don't know if they're telling the truth, and as Maya said, that they're predicting the next thing in a script. They're not thinking. They are not thinking. And I think, we've got to be really careful about that. But I think, again, because we were a bit slow, because we're a bit behind the curve on it, it does mean that I don't think there's a single organization out there right now who isn't racing to try and bring some sort of knowledge in-house in this area. And I think that that is an opportunity for leaders to, try and move equity along a little bit. You've got to look at who are the people that you're putting forward to go and explore these things. And I think any leader in any organization needs to make sure that they're ensuring equity and access to these AI tools, and equity and time given to learn them, so to make sure that you have got, inclusive group of people who are being given the time to go and learn this, because these are going to be the skill sets in 10, 15, 20 years time who are taking leadership roles. So let's make sure from the grassroots we're giving everyone an equal opportunity to learn this stuff.
Such a good point around future-proofing our leaders. Maya, Sabrina, thoughts?
Yeah, no, I was just thinking before that I mean, the way everything is set up nowadays, I mean, all the AI governance committees are just strictly technically focused, right? So it's really not, we're really not creating something that has a very diverse oversight. So how are we going to create diverse tools if the criteria for governance around these tools is gives priority to, well, people of specific backgrounds? I mean, we do have an opportunity to include a lot more voices, and just going back, and I think that again I'm going to insist on this quite a bit, and it is a technical point. I mean, strictly speaking, it is a technical point. But we do, I mean, just with synthetic data, for example, we are relying a lot on just survey quant data, whereas we know that the actual result that comes out of that is really quite flat. It's bland. It draws a lot from the large language model that it's working with. It's really excluding very pertinent, fresh, dynamic, qualitative, ethnographic data, anything that gives us a little bit more nuance, that brings forward those typical contradictions that people feel in everyday lives when they think about whatever category, product or service or whatever, right? We're excluding all that nuance because we are building these systems not just with not having a diverse governance, managing all of this, but also because the type of data that we include is really not very insightful overall. It's again, it's just numbers. It's ones and zeros at the end of the day. So yeah, but it is quite, I mean, when we started this conversation and when I had to think more about, especially about this last question, which is not something that honestly I have given a lot of thought before. And then I just looked at the profile of, the people that are managing this in my organization. It's like, oh my God, but this is data scientists, and it's mainly data scientists. And that's a very specific profile, right? So yeah, that, I mean, it would be good if we change that, and, it would be a small step, but a meaningful one.
Yeah, I was just going to kind of add to what everyone else has said, but kind of coming back to my kind of first point when I was talking about, the opportunity, I guess, of AI and EDI working together. There's a statistic I found that 85% of synthetic data vendors say they lack standardized bias testing frameworks. That's the fact that basically there is no standard way to do this. We are kind of putting the track down while the train is already running. And so we are in again, an opportunity to kind of build these guidance and these guardrails in the right way, in the most inclusive way. And something I was thinking about was that if you go to the AI team right? They're not going to, arguably, there should be AI audits and ethical AI audits in every single team, in every single organization that is building these models. But actually, the CTO and the CPO and the CEO, they're not going to put the AI audit under the EDI banner. They're going to put it under the AI banner. So actually, it brings EDI into that conversation back onto the table, basically, because since then it's been the EDI strategy, for example, has kind of been sitting in the background, but this gives the opportunity to kind of say, okay, we need to have, the audit process happening, and that part of that audit process can be who is on this team, who has been making these decisions, what kind of data, all those questions that we've been talking about. And actually, those are the questions that we've been talking about from EDI all along, right? Who are the people in the business making the decisions? So again, I kind of see it almost like a Trojan horse or like a conduit, I guess, to kind of saying, let's push the EDI agenda through the AI development that's happening. And not only do we, not only are we kind of mitigating that risk, but actually we're kind of proactively taking a step forward and kind of taking control of that rather than it being a defensive kind of thing, if you see what I mean. So I think, yeah, again, I think it's a way to get that EDI strategy back on the table under the AI lens, basically.
It's powerful. Yeah, we've had a few comments and in the chat box, one from Christine, Sabrina, cheering on your point there, which is great. We're almost at time. We've had one question coming through the Q&A box, which I think we've kind of answered, but I'll read it out all the same. And if anyone's got any other add-ons to what we've said, please feel free to add them on. So the question's from Lucy Lee, and it says, isn't there an inherent flaw in that the AI is trained on existing data, but we've acknowledged that so many of the voices we want to hear are missing from the data? If so, how do we get around that? I think we've kind of covered this, but if there's anything else anyone wants to add on that point, please do, before we kind of try and wrap up.
And my only view on that is there are frameworks out there. IBM, there are big companies who have fairness and ethical AI frameworks that can be accessed and you can run your models against them. So there are practical ways to kind of think about that. And then obviously, as we talked about, anything going forward, we want to make sure is of the highest data quality, is all of these models are based on historical data. That's one of the issues. So of course, it's only as good as what we were doing 10 years ago or 5 years ago, which is, obviously things hopefully have moved forward a little bit. So yeah, I guess there are practical things that you can do. And like I said, I think the responsibility lies with all of us to ask those questions and to arm ourselves with those questions to ask. Yeah, that's my that's my 2 pence worth.
Thank you. I mean, we've covered quite a lot of stuff here, and we probably could have talked for another hour, but there was an interesting point, Bex, that you'd raised around everyone sort of assuming that it was neutral. And I think that's where this illusion comes from, right? We've been talking about inclusion for years as well, and yet somehow we still haven't got there. And it's because there is a bit of an illusion around what it actually means versus the reality of it. And so I guess the last question, because we always like to wrap up with a little bit of action, is if there's one thing that people that are listening can do practically to turn this illusion of inclusion into a reality when it comes to our data and our practices in market research, what advice would you guys give? I'll let you unmute yourself and throw in your thoughts. Oh, I love
That was a bit of a race. I thought two. We're too polite. We're being too polite. Okay, one quick thing that I think people can do is, whether it's your research projects, whether it's your teams, whether it's the people that you're putting forward to do the audits or the safeguard and whatever, just ask yourself who's missing and make it your business to bring them in. And then one other one, but it's quick. It's just let's own our responsibility in this as a sector, because these challenges aren't market research challenges alone. You know, they're cultural challenges, but our sector is uniquely positioned to lead by example. So let's lead and not follow.
Great. Maya.
There was one other thing that was kind of going through my head this whole time that has a lot to do with representation, and I think we're forgetting a lot about validation. I mean, we definitely are focusing a lot on the data and what kind of data we're including and how representative it is. But we also need to make sure that it's actually performing against, well, it's delivering on what it's promising to deliver on. And the only way that we can know is if we actually validate with human data and make that part of the process, right? And I see way too often in this rush for efficiencies and going faster and being more agile and just, you know, delivering like the sexiest tool that we have around. And it's just not necessarily going to serve the purpose that it's meant to serve. So we have to be very, very wary of that. You know, data like this may be good for one use case, but it might not be good for this, you know, a different use case. So we have to keep training these models and validating. I think that's a big question that we still have to deal with. It's just not part of the conversation yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I think the illusion part of it, I think I was saying the other day around, it reminds me of like when GPS came into force, and you know, you put on your TomTom and plugged in Stephen Fry and drove off, you know, people were driving off cliffs because they were kind of blindly accepting what was being told to them. And I think we hopefully are starting to come out the other side of that and understand that actually not everything that is coming back from these models is always accurate or unbiased. And so again, yeah, I think it comes back to everybody's responsibility to ask questions. One of my key things is it explainable? Is the model explainable? Can you explain it in really plain English? And don't, you know, there's a lot about transparency in the regulation, but that's a key thing. If it's a black box, we can't understand it. We don't know how it's making decisions. We don't know what parts are more important than other parts. And that's where the transparency comes into play. So I think that's a really kind of key aspect for us all to understand, and us all to kind of question.
Such a great point. Do you know, I think there's something sexy about the black box, isn't there? And so people almost sort of admire that kind of, oh, I don't know, it must mean it's intelligent
Amazing,
or
yeah.
important. Yeah, it's like when someone says something clever and people don't understand and actually they're just chatting shit. Excuse my language. But yeah, you know, I think there's something really interesting going on around that. And to the point raised by a few of you around kind of how we need to stop following, because if we're just following and not leading, we're effectively going to get caught in the trap of being like, oh, look at the shiny new thing somebody else made, it must be clever. Sorry, T, you've got probably got something to add at the end. Did you?
Yeah, you guys have covered everything quite well. The only thing I was going to add is if we're thinking about, you know, putting together the actual data itself through surveys and research and quant and so forth, just ask yourself, would I do this survey? Would I take part in this activity? You know, that's always a good litmus test to actually know whether what you're putting together is actually going to be not necessarily just representative, but actually get attention spans in the right way, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Amazing. Well, look, we're at time. Thank you everyone for attending. I mean, this is a conversation that could go on forever. So if you have any additional thoughts, please feel free to reach out to any of the members of the core team or pop them on LinkedIn and tag Colour of Research, and we'll start a conversation. Let's keep the conversation going. It's really important. Thank you massively to my wonderful panelists. You've been amazing. And we will catch up with everyone on the next webinar. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
Shazia. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.